150 Psalms in the Bible, and I've heard it said that the Psalms give us 150 examples of things we can say to God. And that's wonderful because the Psalms really span the gamut of human emotion. It seems that you can say almost anything to God as long as you are sharing what is authentically on your heart and your mind. Whatever you are feeling, God can shoulder your honesty, it seems, brutal as it may be at times. No matter what we feel, betrayal, anger, loss, grief, shame, it seems that a psalmist has felt that way too. And all of this has been preserved in a book that has served as a liturgical core for faith communities for thousands of years. Today we'll be reading from Psalm 137, and this is a very difficult psalm. It begins with deep, agonizing grief, and then it devolves into an expression of revenge fantasies. It's a really tough one to read, and when you consider that the Psalter is a prayer book, it's even more difficult to pray. As we understand the rage that was warranted given the trauma that the exiles had survived and the oppression that they were living in, it's still hard to pray these words. I'm going to read the first 4 verses of Psalm 137, perhaps one of the most heartbreaking psalms in the Psalter. Along Babylon's streams, there we sat down, crying because we remembered Zion. We hung our lyres up in the trees there because that's where our captors asked us to sing. Our tormentors requested songs of joy. Sing us a song about Zion, they said. But how could we possibly sing the Lord's song on foreign soil? Doesn't that just make you want to cry? With most of the Psalms, we don't exactly know the specifics of what is happening to the psalmist. But in Psalm 137, it is clear what they are expressing. They're reflecting on the destruction of Jerusalem. By the rivers of Babylon, the exiles were grieving and remembering Zion. If we place ourselves in this psalm, we can feel the pain and grief alongside of the exiles, the violence they had witnessed and survived, the family and friends they had lost. They'd have had everything stripped away from them, and now their captors were taunting them. Come on, sing us a song about Jerusalem, your indestructible city that lies in ruins. In this torment, it's as if they were asking, where is your God now? Anyone who's ever been taunted or bullied can relate to the grief and the despair of this story. Sing us one of your songs about the God who has forsaken you. Sing to us a song of your God who did not protect you, your God who could not protect even God's own home. Their captors were mocking them in their pain and their loss, pretty confident that they had not just defeated Jerusalem, but the God of Israel. No wonder the exiles hung up their instruments and silenced their songs. How heartbreaking for their songs of faith, remembrance, praise, songs of deep spiritual longings, of communal identity, reduced to entertainment for their mocking captors. How could they possibly sing in a situation like this? In the context of Psalm 137, the wound is very fresh. The exiles are in shock, unable to imagine how to move forward. I think sometimes we find ourselves in that place too, unsure how to move forward, questioning perhaps if we even are able to move forward. Have you ever felt like you have lost your song? I know I have at times. We've been unraveling all summer long. This tangle of ribbon and yarn that has been our altarscape has also kind of served for me as an outward and visible sign of an inward twists and tangles that I have been feeling. Living in this time of pandemic and social isolation, church exile, all the ways that that's impacted us, and all of the deep wrestling with racial injustice that we've been having that have been on the forefront of our minds and in our conversations this summer. Unraveling has been a good metaphor for this time. I don't know about you, but I have felt lately as though my reservoirs of joy have been running a little low. There's so much heavy in the world right now, so much sorrow and pain. Relationships are strained as our polarization of our political discourse pulls at the seams of friendships and families. I feel weary. My heart breaks. I feel my reservoirs of joy running low. In discerning what comes next for us, what comes after all of this unraveling, I have felt this strong need to investigate joy. I felt that pull, and I also heard my head saying, how can we sing songs of holy joy in the landscape that we're looking at? Sickness, death, division, injustice. How can we possibly sing of joy in a time like this? I'm calling the series that we're moving into Deep Joy. And in this series, we will be exploring, pointing each other toward, and hopefully drawing from the deep well of joy. Not surface happiness that depends on things going our way, but the unexplainable joy that seems to stem from somewhere holy, even in the most unexpected and unexplainable places. I've wondered, how do those who have suffered loss and injustice beyond what I can even comprehend access this unexplainable, resilient joy? We will be exploring this, looking for joy in the midst of reality, not in wishful thinking, but in the actual here and now. Hopefully, we'll start to recognize those guideposts pointing us to the well, filling our reservoirs of joy back up. Our psalm asks the question I've been sitting with this week. How can we sing songs of joy in the midst of the chaos of our time? A couple of weeks ago, I heard a story when I was listening to a podcast, and as I was looking up the story, I learned that it has been attributed to Apache or Sioux tribes, depending on where you reference. This is a story of an old woman who lives alone in a cave on the edge of civilization. In this cave, it is said that the knowledge and wonders of the workings of the world could be found. But the world has lost touch with the location of this cave, and with it, the understanding of how to navigate through dark times, how to find balance again when the world slips into chaos around us. The old woman who lives in the cave doesn't seem to be drawn to the hurry or the worry that burden us so often. Instead, she spends her time weaving a garment and occasionally stirring the soup that she has simmering over a fire. Weaving is her playground, and she finds great joy as she weaves together the lights and the darks, the highs and the lows. She has been weaving and weaving and weaving for many years, breaking only briefly to stir the soup, creating the most exquisite garment in all the world. One day, as she stepped away from her weaving to stir the soup, an old dog, whom she had been paying no mind, moved toward the garment, drawn towards its beauty. The dog picked up a loose thread with one of its teeth and began to pull. As the dog pulled, the garment began to unravel. And the dog continued to pull, and the garment continued to unravel. When the old woman returned from stirring the soup, she found her garment, all of her work, reduced to a tangled pile of thread on the floor. The woman stood there, speechless, and she stared at the remains of her once exquisite garment that she had worked her hands to the bone to create. And all that remained was undone threads and distorted patterns. What had once been the pinnacle of elegance and beauty was now a chaos of tangles. After finding her breath, following the shock of the destruction of her creation, the old woman sat down. And she picked up whatever thread was nearest to her, whatever thread she could reach, and she began to weave again. From the chaotic tangle on the floor, she began again to imagine the most beautiful garment in the whole world. And as she began to weave, new visions and elegant designs revealed themselves to her imagination. Her weary old hands began to give the threads new and vibrant shape. As the beauty of the new garment began to take shape, she forgot about the loss of her previous garment, instead concentrating on the new design, picking up the threads and weaving them into the most beautiful garment in all the world. How can we sing songs of joy in the landscape of injustice, division, anxiety, fear, illness, alienation? Where do we find hope when our previous hopes and dreams seem to have unraveled into a heap of tangles on the floor? Perhaps we simply pick up the thread that is nearest to where we stand and begin to weave again. In Psalm 137, the psalmist has lost his voice, hung up his instrument, and can't imagine making music. And then resolves never to forget Jerusalem. Holocaust survivor, author, teacher, humanitarian Elie Wiesel reflected often on the importance of memory. He said that forgetfulness leads to exile and memory to redemption. Of course, nothing quite helps us remember like song. It's astounding to me how many words I can remember from so long ago just because they had been paired with a catchy tune. How can we sing? Perhaps we look for and remember those threads of goodness and joy worth singing about. Perhaps we sing to remember, and we remember so that we can sing.